everyone, and welcome back to the vlogs. Today is day 5, where we're gonna take a golf cart tour. It's not gonna be hop on, hop off, but it should still be good. Should still get some good Washington Monument footage. That's a running gag. The Washington Monument, gotta film that all day, every day. I've actually gotta live stream the Washington Monument. But no, we're gonna try to see all the monuments now that I'm recording this on the 5th. So they should all be open. Like the Lincoln Memorial, the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. All those wonderful memorials that were closed yesterday and the day before. So, yeah.
No, you actually don't. You can just walk right on up, and you can see there is a sizable line, but it goes quickly. And this is where you can see like the Spirit of St. Louis. You can take a look at the lunar lander. You can touch a moon rock. The technology component is also really cool, because that's where you've got the Albert Einstein Planetarium. You lean back, learn about the history of the universe. It's set to resemble like the windswept adobe structures of the tribes you might find in the Southwest. What else is really neat about the museum, you can take a walk along the exterior and see different examples of environments you might find in North America. So for instance, on our right-hand side here, examples of the totem poles of the tribes of the upper Northwest. On the far side, the Great Plains regions and the teepees. And at the end of this road, examples of the swampland region of, say, Jamestown, or even here in Washington, D.C. Art style. It was completed in 1874 by a man named Edward Casey. And the neat thing about Edward Casey, his father was Thomas Casey. Doesn't really sound like much now, but his father, Thomas Casey, was the engineer who completed the Washington Monument. So on the one hand, you have the father who's creating the Washington Monument, and the son who's completing the Library of Congress. So it's this very talented family of artists and engineers. Now, this is also considered the Library of Last Resort. Anytime there is a book published in the United States, 2 copies go here to the Library of Congress. But you go inside, and it's free to go inside, free to visit. You can take tours inside. I happen to give a Library of Congress tour myself. So, yes, so if you guys need more of your Monty fix, I can definitely help you out with that. But it's really gorgeous on the inside. They have the main reading room, and anybody can go and get a library card for the Library of Congress, and that's where you can go, and that'll grant you access to the main reading room. It's very quiet, and that's where you can grab any book in the collection and sit down and read it. So really neat stuff.
Is that where the Ibsen number comes from?
Beg your pardon.
IBSN, Ibsen number. It seems like, I mean, we have all these books, and then all the books have an Ibsen number.
So I'm not entirely sure. You've got me stumped, and that's going to happen from time to time. What I do know is that in order to get a book, you have to go online, and they've got a little reference number. Maybe that's the Ibsen number, and you jot it down on a slip of paper, and they have people in the main reading room, and you give them that slip of paper with the reference number, and they're the ones that go and get the book for you. They don't just let anybody walk up and start grabbing books off the shelves. And that whole process can take between 45 minutes to an hour for them to retrieve your book. So
It's a nice view of the Capitol building. There we go. Looking at so many lights. We could just... It's a nice view there, which the Capitol building's in the middle of Washington, D.C. It's sectioned into 4 sections: northwest, southwest, southeast, and northeast. So this is great.
was completed in 1935. And before that, this location used to be a prisoner of war camp during the U.S. Civil War, and they would have housed the high-profile prisoners, the Confederate prisoners. So like the officers, the generals who were captured in war, they would have been housed over this direction, where the U.S. Capitol, they could keep a very close eye on them. And in fact, when Abraham Lincoln was president, he would frequently go to that prisoner of war camp, and he would meet with these guys, and he would try to convince them to turn away from the secessionist mentality to rejoin the Union, which is actually a really brave thing when you think about it, because all it would have taken was a diehard. Things could have changed. Yeah, like mid-war. So, now guys, what used to be really big into international relations, and what I really had wanted to do with my life was to be a policy wonk, and to talk about China specifically. Like, I was fascinated with China and Chinese, clean energy. So really like niche kind of topic, but they, so I would go to these kind of open hearings, these open events to try and do a little bit of networking, see if there were job openings. And there was one day I was really feeling fortunate that I might be able to go, because the Chinese ambassador was giving a talk over at the Senate building. Now, I had done my homework ahead of time, and this committee, they had written a scathing report about China. So at the very end of the panel discussion, they asked you, hey, any questions? And so I stood up and I asked them, what part of the report did the Chinese ambassador disagree with? What was their perspective? And I gave out all these examples, and a hush fell over the entire committee. And I had clearly asked an uncomfortable question, and at that point I was pretty much blacklisted from any job.
Biggest pictures.
Yeah. You're not supposed to ask the tough questions of the Chinese ambassador. No. Which, I mean, come on, that's
Maybe when things are changed.
yeah. But in the end, I do get a good story out of it. I totally embarrassed the Chinese ambassador. I can't think of too many people who've had that opportunity, so I know, I'm pretty cool. Yeah. So, this is where the Charters of Freedom are housed. So the U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and Bill of Rights. And I believe they might still have a temporary exhibit on the 19th Amendment, because back June 4th, so 100 years ago, that marked the signing of, it marked the ability for women to vote in this country.
Yes.
So, so they have this whole little exhibit. It's temporary. They had photos of the suffragettes and newspaper articles from that period of time, 100 years ago.
Tours there too. I think that'd be.
Yeah, they do.
They have one where you can go in and you can see all those things you just mentioned.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if we have tickets or what, but yeah, I think you can just you go in and you go see all the significant events there. Bill of Rights stuff.
Yep. So, all right. Now guys, on the right-hand side, this is a really neat place in Washington, D.C. This is the National Sculpture Garden, and it is associated with the National Gallery of Art. Really well put together garden with a beautiful fountain. My favorite part about the Sculpture Garden, though, every Friday, and today is a Friday, they have a live jazz festival that takes place. It's live, it's free, and it runs from 5 to 8 p.m. It's like the thing to do in DC during the summer. It brings in a crowd of maybe 2,000 people or so, and this is where you can get a picture of lemonade, a picture of maybe the world's most watered down sangria. You can take your shoes and socks off, put your feet in the water, cool down. It's just a really pleasant way to spend an evening. Now, quick word about the fountain though. Even though you are able to put your feet in the water to cool down, they have a super strict rule against wading in the fountain. You are not allowed to stand up and just start walking around. That said, last summer, my sister and I, we were here, feet in the water, hanging out, minding our own business. And some joker passed around a handwritten note that said, "Flash mob, dance in the fountain, 5:30.
Oh my gosh.
So 5:28, 5:29, 5:30. We looked at each other, hopped in the fountain, started dancing, and 100 people joined us. It was so good. It was so much fun. Everybody was having a great time, except for exactly one lady. the lady in charge of making sure nobody wades in the fountain.
Right.
She was pretty upset, and I can't blame her. You know, a handful of rowdy individuals, that's a reprimand.
Maybe that
You
sangria
can't
was
stop.
a little stronger that day.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh,
You
look
know.
at that tree. It's all painted silver.
Yeah. So like,
That's
you know,
what
just
I
some
thought.
really thought-provoking, just interesting little statue work. I'll also add that the cafeteria over here, the cafe, really good pulled pork sandwiches. So I don't know if you guys have any plans for the rest of today, but maybe just tuck this as an option in the back of your heads between 5 and 8 p.m. It's a free concert. It's just a really fun place. It's a fun thing to do in
So that was
DC on
what was
Fridays.
the National
Sculpture Garden.
Sculpture Garden?
So we have our daughter as our tour guide
Oh,
all
yeah.
day, and she said either the Spy Museum or this.
Yeah.
The Spy Museum.
The Spy Museum is nice. Do not get me wrong, but I think this is a more low-key event. You just kind of hang out and you can chit-chat and listen to music, dance if you feel like it, but again, I'd write that note first. Yeah. Because on the left-hand side, I love talking about the Smithsonian Castle. It's this red castle on the left-hand side. The reason why Washington, D.C. has all these free museums and art galleries is thanks to one individual, and his name was James Smithson. Now, when James Smithson died in 1829, he did something really bizarre. He left his inheritance to the U.S. government. That's weird for so many reasons. For starters, who leaves their inheritance to the U.S. government, right? Other weird reason, Smithson was not an American. He was English. What's more, he had never even been to the United States before, but he left us this money, $500,000 in $1829, equivalent to 1/66 of the national income at that time. And he said, listen, fellas, I'm giving you this money. I want you to do two things with it. He said, I want you to create an institution and name it after me. Totally legit. James Smithson, the Smithsonian Institute. And he said the purpose of this institute should be for the increase and the diffusion of knowledge. A lot of money, very broad mandate. Congress, they weren't expecting the funds. It came out of nowhere. They sat on the money for 20 years. And it wasn't until the Polk administration when they said, you know what? Let's make a museum with this money. That'll fit the mandate. So the American architect James Renwick was given responsibility for producing the first Smithsonian. He drew inspiration from Smithson's English heritage. That's why he went with a castle. This castle's, frankly, not really a part of U.S. history or U.S. culture. It's more of an English thing. And initially, the castle was set to be made entirely out of marble, but Renwick saw that was going to be quite expensive. So instead, he went with a red Seneca sandstone. I am very grateful for that choice because, frankly, if you look around DC, we've got a bunch of marble buildings. So pretty cool, pretty unique to have this red castle right in the middle of town. And these days, the castle, it's the administrative headquarters for the Institute. They've got a small permanent collection, but they've also got the visitor center. So if you wanted to really, take a deeper expose into the different collections at the museums, this would be a good resource for you all. Now, certainly on the right-hand side is another very popular museum in DC. It's the Natural History Museum. And just about 3 weeks ago, they finally opened the Dinosaurs Exhibit. And that's where you can see the most complete skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So, the little boy in me always gets excited over the Dinosaurs Exhibit. But they've also got a great exhibit on mammals, on oceans. My favorite, though, is the second floor Gems and Minerals exhibit. And that's where you can see rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and diamonds, including the Hope Diamond, which is valued at $250 million. Now, for some folks coming to the Natural History Museum, it can be a little underwhelming when you take a look at the Hope Diamond, because frankly, it's not a particularly large diamond. The size is not what makes it unique. What makes the Hope Diamond special is the color. It's like a dark blue, almost a purple color. My understanding, the chances of a diamond appearing naturally with that color, something like 1 in 1 trillion. So when you step back and think about it, statistically speaking, the Hope Diamond should not even exist, and yet you can go inside and see it with your very own eyes. So pretty neat
Where
exhibit.
was it found?
It was discovered in India in the 1850s, and it has this whole story how it like went into the British Museum for a little while, moved around to different families, and it was the Hope family who decided that the diamond was too cursed to own, so they donated it to the Smithsonian. I think it's a safe bet to say every country in the world has a national history museum. These are the places where a country can show off to its citizens and the world all the items, all the things that country finds important about its past. Which is why I love the American History Museum, because you go inside, first thing you see is the Batmobile. And certainly they've got Dorothy's ruby red shoes, and Indiana Jones's hat and whip, Abraham Lincoln's top hat, Julia Child's kitchen. But probably the biggest attraction is the First Lady Inaugural Ball Gowns exhibit. And that's where you can see from Abigail Adams all the way up to Melania how American high fashion has changed through the centuries. So just really unique to see American history through fashion. And until you get to the upper floors of the museum, which have a focus on the contemporary issues facing the African American community in our country today.
Really, really very good.
And what amazes me about the African American History Museum is that it's built on sheets of glass
Yes.
with no pillars or columns on the corners at all to support it.
Yep. And they've got that really incredible stairwell as well. That it's just a really it's like a modern marvel because it's a stairwell that's like right in the middle, and there's no supports. It's just one of those stairwells where each block acts as a cornerstone. So if you remove one block, the whole thing falls down. So now it goes without saying, I'll say it anyway though. At the African American History Museum, you can get the best soul food in Washington, D.C. So really good ribs, great collard greens, cornbread. So, and I know that might sound a little flip, but cuisine is a really important part of the culture, so they do that on purpose. 5 feet tall, and you might notice the color changes about 1/3 of the way up. Sorry, I have a hard time talking over buses. Yeah.
I've been told that the top 8 inches are made out of aluminum.
Yes, yes. And I'll definitely get into that. But I do like to describe the construction in terms of 2 phases: before and after the U.S. Civil War. So before the Civil War, all the marble, all the material came from a local quarry in Maryland. At the outbreak of the Civil War, construction halted, and in fact the ground surrounding the Washington Monument was converted into a slaughter yard where cows, sheep, and pigs were killed in order to feed the Army of the Potomac, the Union Northern Forces. At the end of the U.S. Civil War, responsibility for completing the Washington Monument was given to a gentleman named Thomas Casey. And if you'll remember, his son Edward Casey was the gentleman who completed the Library of Congress. Now, Thomas Casey was an engineer in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For whatever reason, he did not go back to the same local quarry. He went to a different one out in Massachusetts. So he went to Massachusetts, he got all the material, sent it back to D.C., he started laying the marble slabs on top of each other, and within a day, realized he goofed. Because it turns out there are many different shades of white. But he already had the material and he said, whatever, I'm going to finish this thing. And to Thomas Casey's credit, he did. He completed the Washington Monument in 1884. At that time, he also put the last 8 inches was a block of aluminum. Not so impressive it sounds like these days, but at that time, aluminum was considered one of the most precious materials out there, so he spared no expense. The stairwell was installed in 1886, and the elevator was completed in 1888. And a quick word about the elevator. When the elevator first opened, only men were allowed to use the elevator, and they would be given wine, cheese, perhaps a little music. Women and children had to use the stairs. Not fair, I know. But these days, I promise, totally more fair. Nobody can go up the Washington Monument. And that's because several years ago, they shut down the stairwell you can take a look and see there's like no emergency exit. So if somebody had a medical complication, they could not be taken out in time. And last year, like, go figure, the elevator broke. So they say August 2019, next month, they'll have the elevator back in operation. Call me a cynic, but I'll believe it when I see it, because this is already the second time they pushed back the opening of the elevator. So, you know, they make these wild promises, these wild declarations, but then they never actually follow through. The statue of Thomas Jefferson originally was facing this direction, south into Virginia, you know, Jefferson's home, his native land. But FDR, who was a fierce supporter of this project, he had a bit of influence. And initially, the statue of Jefferson was, and he actually had the statue of Jefferson rotated to face the White House. That way, when FDR woke up in the morning, he would get his coffee, get his newspaper, look out across the White House, see Jefferson's face, and draw inspiration for the day. The Dr. King Memorial. So like I said, let's not hop off here because I'm on a active road and there are buses that come through, so I can't stay here for too long. But this is just still a really nice view. But certainly when we get over to the Dr. King Memorial, that's a really great view as well.
Okay. Where her shoe go? I have it in my hand. Margie and Ma, y'all want to take one? I already have one somewhere. I think it's in my
Anecdote as well about the World War II Memorial. Back in 1999, when Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks completed the film Saving Private Ryan, they were shocked that at that time DC did not have a completed World War II memorial. They reached into their pockets and they did fundraising with their Hollywood friends in order to come up with the money needed to complete the World War II memorial, and it was finally completed in 2004. So
Yay! I hope I got it this time. I hope I got it.
maybe
Turned
another word or so about the Albert Einstein.
Oh,
I'm gonna drive past and I'm gonna go nice and slow, and you'll see that it forms this little optic where they meet, and it fills in the Red Cross symbol. So if you guys just wanted to keep your eyes on the right hand side, again, I'll drive nice and slow and you'll see it fits together kind of like a puzzle piece. Yep. Yeah, it's so simple, but it's still pretty neat. Yeah. Of 1812, the owner had an argument with his daughter. The daughter had fallen in love with a British officer. The father was going to have none of it, so they had this terrible argument on the top floor. The daughter turned around in a huff, tripped, fell down the stairs, and died at the bottom of the stairs. 11 years later, The younger daughter had an argument with her father, also on the top floor, also over a man. She turned around in a huff, tripped, fell down the stairs, and died at the same spot as her sister. And they say that if you're here late at night, the lights will start to flicker and you'll hear thumping.
It's the most haunted building in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. I think it's very beautiful, but there's no arguing it stands out. And in fact, there have been architectural critics over the years, notably Mark Twain, the American author. He called this the ugliest building in the United States. And, you know, that might raise an eyebrow, but then you have to remember Twain was aggressively anti-French.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah. I know, yeah. So, I mean, this is like a late 18th century style, building.
French building.
Now, it's not always been called the White House. It's gone through a few name changes, from the Presidential Palace, the Executive Mansion. It wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt was in office in 1901 that he renamed it the White House. That's the name that stuck. And in Roosevelt's line of thinking, palace, mansion, these are lofty titles for what should be the home of the American people. Now, for some folks coming to DC, the number one thing they want to do is to go on a White House tour. In order to go on a tour, you have to be a U.S. citizen, you have to go through your representative, you have to go through a background check, which not everybody passes, and even then, you're not guaranteed your tour. You can be waiting in line, ready to go, and some nerd with a clipboard will come up and say, so sad, too bad, all White House tours are canceled today. There can be some last-minute event that comes up, or some big shot will say, man, I don't feel like dealing with tours, can we not do this today? About 90% of all White House tours end up getting canceled.
Really?
Yep. Now that said, I have been on a tour and it's kind of interesting. For starters, you get to say, la-di-da, I've been inside the White House. You go inside, you get into the blue room, the green room, and it's a museum about the White House. And you find out how First Lady X made this change, First Lady Y made that change. My favorite part about the White House, the thing I think is the most cool, 35 bathrooms. And I think that's really awesome because if you can look someone in the face and say, I live in a house with 35 bathrooms, it kind of tells people you made it in life.
Yeah. Who's the statue?
That is Andrew Jackson. Yes, so that's Andrew Jackson. And the cannons that you see around the Jackson statue, that's war booty. Captured English cannons from the War of 1812, still on display. And if you did a little bit of restoration work, they would be operational. Yeah. So. Then I certainly also like to point out this funky church on the left-hand side. This is...
There is the Capitol building. So we got off the tour, we ate lunch, and now we're walking to the archives. Or the archives, where they keep everything. Like the Declaration, everything. So, what's going on there? But there's your up close and personal with the Capitol building. So this is the National Archives building from the outside. There's no video we can take from the inside. So, Declaration of Independence is in there. And right there, that corner there, that's where we saw the parade yesterday. But yeah, I enjoyed it. This is all the metro lines. So you have these lines, stops, all that you have. And by the way, for all my gamers in the audience, there's Bethesda right there. So you have that. So I'm guessing that's the Fallout stop. I don't know. That's the nuclear Fallout stop right there. So that's the map of the metro, in case you were wondering what it looked like in DC. So there you go. This is another map of Washington DC. See, we watched the parade from here, the National Archives at 9th and Constitution Avenue. And then we are right here, Smithsonian, to get to our hotel, I believe, which I think our hotel's just off map here, but to get from the National Archives, we needed to go here, and then down, and then right there, and then we could have cut across here. There's the Washington Monument, there's the National Museum of American History, there's the Natural History, and then there's everything there. So, there we go.
Jefferson transfer is available to the red line on the upper level and to the silver and blue lines on this level. Doors opening on the left.
So this is a map of a different part of Washington, D.C. This is where we watched the parade the other day, Constitution at night, as I just explained. So basically, to get to the parade, we walked up here, up 9th, past Chinatown, which was pretty good. I actually like Chinatown, past the Mint that I wanted to go to. And then we got to Massachusetts, which, as a reminder, all the state roads go diagonal, all the numbered roads go north and south, all the lettered roads go east and west. So we walked up Massachusetts to 13th, and then our hotel is right here on the corner. And it goes up to Logan Circle, right there. So that's the route in which we walked. Started here, Massachusetts, got to 9th, bam, all the way down to right here. And it only took us like 20 minutes, so there we go.
So we're back at the hotel after eating dinner, supper, whatnot. We ate lunch at the Department of Agriculture. They give you this once they verify that, once they check your bags, and once you've, assuming you have any bags, purses, backpacks, you name it, whatever, and everything in your pockets, just to make sure that you're not carrying anything you shouldn't. And
your ID.
yeah, and your ID. They check your ID too. I almost forgot about that. And then we ate over there at the corner of 12 and L. Was it, Bella? I believe?
Yes, yeah.
Or 12 and M. Well, our hotel's at 13 and M. So that's where we've been staying. And Let me just say that I have really enjoyed this trip. I could have easily spent 2 weeks here. That's how much there is to see in Washington, D.C. Oh, by the way, that's at 13th and M Northwest. It's not southwest, it's not northeast, not southeast. But regardless, though, I have really enjoyed this trip to the point where I could spend 2 weeks here, because you could practically spend half the day in a museum by itself. We spent like 4 hours in this, almost 4 hours in the Spy Museum itself. So, and on the way back, before we rode the metro, we went inside the Smithsonian. We saw the minerals and the Hope Diamond and all that wonderful stuff. And then we saw the fossil exhibit there. It was great. I loved it. And I didn't record in there because there were too many people there. And it was too noisy and it was too crowded. It would not have made for good footage. And so yes, guys, I do believe that this will conclude this series of vlogs. I would like to thank you all for watching day 5 and all the other days that you may or may not have watched. And I guess until my next trip, goodbye, guys. Thank you all for watching.